Off the eastern coast of Australia, 15 meters beneath the surface, something is happening that shouldn't be possible. The seafloor here is flat and featureless, a blank canvas of gray sand stretching in every direction. There's no coral reef or dramatic underwater canyon, just an empty, quiet underwater desert. And then, a city. Not a human city or anything built by a creature we've ever associated with civilization. Dozens of dens carved into the sea floor, shells piled like walls. And everywhere you look, octopuses. 8 of them, 12 of them, more, living next to each other, watching each other, and gesturing at each other. They are chasing rivals, courting mates, and even evicting neighbors from their homes. These are animals that every biology textbook on Earth has described as solitary, loners, creatures that only meet once a year to mate, and even then want to leave as fast as possible afterwards. But somebody forgot to tell the octopuses. The gloomy octopus, Octopus tetrachus. That is literally its scientific name. Tetrachus means gloomy, sullen, or grim. These animals live in subtropical coastal waters off of eastern Australia and northern New Zealand, and they look exactly how they sound. Mottled reddish-brown with pale webbing between their arms and eyes that seem permanently unimpressed, like someone who's been to a lot of parties and didn't enjoy any of them. But here's the thing about the gloomy octopus, or octopuses in general. They are extraordinary, and not in the vague everything in nature is cool way, in the this thing should not exist way. Start with the brain. An octopus has about 500 million neurons, roughly as many as a dog. But here's the insane part. 2/3 of those neurons don't live in the brain. They live in the arms. Each arm is a semi-independent computational unit, capable of taste, touch, and decision-making without waiting for orders from the head. One arm can figure out how to crack open a clam, while the rest of the octopus is scouting a new den. The arm doesn't ask permission, it just does it. Cut an arm off, even from a dead octopus, and pinch it, and it curls away. It responds. The arm doesn't need the octopus to still be alive to react to the world. It has enough of its own nervous system to do that on its own. And somehow, this distributed brain, this mind that lives in 8 limbs, can navigate mazes, open child-proof containers, untie knots, recognize individual human faces, and escape from supposedly sealed aquarium tanks. Scientists at aquariums have reported octopuses leaving their tanks at night, sneaking across the floor to a neighboring tank, eating the fish inside, and returning to their own tank before morning. Some have been caught on camera. Others were only identified because of the wet floor trails left behind. They figured this out themselves. Nobody taught them, and nobody believed it until the cameras rolled. So, that's the animal we're dealing with. An 8-armed, color-changing, brain-distributed, possibly too intelligent creature that marine biologists spent decades labeling a loner. And then they found the city. The year is 2009. Jervis Bay on the southeastern coast of New South Wales, Australia. A recreational diver named Matt Lawrence is poking around the sea floor when he finds something that makes no sense. A cluster of gloomy octopuses. Not 2, not 3, 16 of them all living in close proximity to each other, in dens carved into the sea floor. In a roughly 2 by 1 meter patch of ocean floor that, by every rule of octopus behavior known to science, should have had, at most, 1 octopus in it, maybe. Lawrence calls in the scientists. Marine biologist Peter Godfrey Smith of the University of Sydney arrives with cameras and skepticism in equal measure. What they find blows the skepticism out of the water. The site is built around a central object, a piece of human-made material, maybe scrap metal, about 30 centimeters long, heavily encrusted and no longer identifiable. Somehow, octopuses have been using this object as the nucleus of a settlement. Over years, possibly decades, They've been dragging scallop shells back from their hunts and piling them up around this central point, creating a bed of debris dense enough to excavate proper dens into. One octopus finds a good spot, leaves shells when it's done eating. Another octopus shows up, finds those shells useful, builds nearby, and leaves their shells. Another octopus arrives, and the cycle repeats. What was probably an accident, a weird piece of junk on an otherwise empty seafloor, became a settlement. And the settlement built itself, shell by shell, octopus by octopus, without a single creature understanding that's what was happening. Godfrey Smith names it Octopolis. He watches it for years. At any given time, there are between 2 and 16 octopuses present. The numbers rise and fall. Once, a Wabagong shark moved into the neighborhood and octopus numbers crashed. Apparently, even these creatures understand when it's a bad time to be living close to others. But the scientific community at this point is cautiously intrigued and largely dismissive. Octopolis, the thinking goes, is a fluke, an anomaly created by that strange man-made object. The octopuses didn't choose to live together. They just happened to be near a useful object. That explanation was about to collapse completely. Fast forward to 2016, still in Jervis Bay, a few hundred meters from Octopolis. Two divers, Marty Hing and Kylie Brown, are exploring the sea floor when they find it again. Another cluster. Another field of dens carved into piled shells. 13 octopuses visible in an area measuring roughly 18 by 4 meters. And this time, no mysterious human artifact, no central object, and no convenient piece of scrap metal that an octopus happened to build a neighborhood around. Just rocks and just octopuses. And the accumulated shell beds they built themselves. Stephanie Chancellor, a doctoral student in biological sciences at the University of Illinois at Chicago, coins the name Octlantis and joins Professor David Scheel of Alaska Pacific University and the rest of the team to study it. They set up cameras and they watch. And what the footage reveals begins to dismantle a century of received wisdom about cephalopod behavior. The octopuses at Octlantis are not just living near each other. They are interacting, constantly and intently, and with what can only be described as complex social awareness. Octlantis octopuses regularly chase each other. They posture. They rear up in what researchers have started calling, and I'm not making this up, the Nosferatu pose. Arms spread wide, body raised tall, skin darkening dramatically. It looks like a threat, because it is a threat, and the other octopus reads it as one. An octopus that loses a confrontation goes pale, light-colored and almost white. Research has confirmed this isn't camouflage. The pale color shows up even when there's nothing to hide against. It appears to be a signal. I'm backing down, I'm not a threat. Octopuses can apparently display submission to each other. They change color not just to disappear, but to speak. Dark means aggression. Pale means retreat. There are at least a dozen distinct patterns researchers have cataloged from these interactions. And the key detail, octopuses are technically colorblind, and yet their entire visual communication system is built around high-contrast color displays. And researchers believe other octopuses can read those signals through polarized light, or possibly even through light-sensitive proteins in their own skin. The fascinating way they communicate is still being researched. What we know now is the colors aren't just for hiding, they're for talking. Then there's the evictions. Peter Godfrey Smith describes watching one octopus at Octlantis leave his den, cross 12 meters of open sand, which is a significant journey for an animal that hates being in the open, head directly to where a male-female pair was settled, wrestle the male out of his den, and move in. All while, the displaced male turned pale and retreated. The octopus knew where he was going. He knew who was there. He had a spatial map of his neighborhood in his head, complete with who was living where, and he used it to make a calculated social move. That is not the behavior of a loner. That is real-time social strategy. Let's pause and give context to just how surprising all of this is. The standard view of octopuses, the one you'd find in any marine biology textbook before the 2010s, was that they were asocial to the point of being almost pathological about it. They were described as meeting only to hunt, avoid being hunted, and to mate. That was it. There's a biological reason for this expectation. Octopuses die fast. Most species live only 1 to 2 years. The common octopus, Octopus vulgaris, lives 12 months on the outside. And here's the part that sounds like it was written by someone who deeply resents octopuses. They reproduce once, and then they die. Not die shortly after, die as part of the process. Males die a few months after mating. Females stop eating, start protecting their eggs, and then, in some species, begin attacking themselves and tearing at their own skin, slamming themselves against rocks, and eating their own arms. Scientists identified the mechanism for this in 1977. A pair of glands behind the octopus's eyes, roughly equivalent to our pituitary gland, releases a hormonal signal after reproduction that essentially tells the body to shut down. If you surgically cut the nerves to those glands in a female who's just laid eggs, she abandons the eggs, starts eating again, and can live an additional 4 to 6 months. The glands are a death switch. The likely reason? Octopuses are cannibals. If the older generation stuck around after the eggs hatched, they'd eat all the juveniles. So, evolution built in a self-destruct mechanism. Grandma has to go so the babies can survive. When you live only 1 year, you're genetically wired to self-destruct, and when your only encounter with your own kind is a brief and often violent mating, you don't exactly have time to build neighborhoods. Except, these ones did. Now, here's where we have to be honest about something, because the scientists themselves insist on it. The media went wild when Octlantis was published. Octopuses are building underwater cities. Cephalopod civilization discovered. And the researchers themselves had to write a follow-up paper specifically to push back. In that paper, Scheel and Godfrey Smith wrote almost sternly that what was found at Octopolis and Octlantis is not a city. A city, they argued, is not just a dense population. A city is a center of commerce, culture, and design. Cities are cooperatively constructed and maintained. These octopuses are not cooperating. They're competing. Each one builds its own den, hunts its own food, and defends its own territory. The shell bed that makes all of this possible wasn't designed. It accumulated by accident. Each individual octopus brought home its own scallops for its own meal. The shells piled up because octopuses eat at home rather than in the open, because eating in the open attracts predators. The shared architecture of the settlement is an inadvertent byproduct of thousands of individual selfish decisions. But, and this is the part that matters, even if it's not a city in the human sense, what's happening there is more complex and more social than anything we expected from an octopus. And that distinction between what they are doing and what we thought they could do is exactly where the science gets interesting. The discovery of these sites has contributed to a growing body of evidence that octopus cognition is genuinely unusual. Not just for a cephalopod, but in the broader context of how intelligence evolves. Here's the thing that should stop you cold. Octopus intelligence evolved completely independently from vertebrate intelligence. You and a chimpanzee both got your intelligence from a common ancestor. You and a dolphin share the basic neural architecture of a mammalian cortex. The entire vertebrate intelligence lineage is one story, told in many variations. The octopus is a different story. Their closest living relative is a slug. They branched off from the vertebrate lineage roughly 750 million years ago, before complex nervous systems even existed. And yet, they ended up with 500 million neurons, spatial memory, tool use, social signaling, and possibly the ability to recognize individual humans. This is what scientists call convergent evolution. Nature working from a completely different starting point, arriving at something that looks, in some ways, remarkably like intelligence. There's a study that illustrates this beautifully. Researchers in 2009 documented octopuses in the wild carrying coconut shells, picking them up, tucking themselves under them, and walking away with them for later use as shelter, not eating them, planning to use them in the future. That is tool use that requires anticipating a future need, something we once believed only primates could do. And octopuses do it alone, on the sea floor with no teacher, with a brain the size of a walnut. Back to Octlantis, because if you're thinking this sounds idyllic, a little underwater community of highly intelligent, 8-armed creatures living in shell-studded harmony, let's disabuse you of that. The city is brutal. There's constant aggression. Males chase each other relentlessly. Dens get stolen. Rivals get physically wrestled out of their homes. The researchers filmed octopuses throwing things at each other. Shells, silt, debris, apparently as a kind of long-range harassment. There are accounts of this behavior happening repeatedly at the same pairs, like a grudge. Jervis Bay is also home to wabagong sharks, flat, camouflaged ambush predators that look like a carpet someone left on the sea floor. When a wabagong takes up residence near Octopolis or Octlantis, octopus numbers drop sharply. The sharks have apparently figured out what the shell beds mean: a reliable food source, multiple prey animals in a small area, all of whom are busy fighting each other and can't keep watch in every direction. The city attracts food. The food attracts predators. The predators make the city dangerous. It's a dynamic that will feel familiar to anyone who's ever lived in a crowded urban environment. The mating behavior at these sites is not gentle. Males approach females and either succeed quickly or get driven away, sometimes violently. In one case filmed at Octlantis, a male crossed the entire site to evict a competing male and mate with the female next door. And then within months, he was dead anyway, because that's what it means to be an octopus. So let's zoom out. What does all of this actually mean? When the first octopus city was found, scientists were surprised. When the second was found, with no man-made object to blame it on, they were forced to ask a harder question. Is what we thought we knew about this animal actually wrong? The Royal Society of Canada published a commentary arguing that the discovery of octopus communities is ethically relevant, that if octopuses have culture, social behavior, and communication complex enough to require adjusting our understanding of their cognition, then that should factor into how we treat them. There are companies right now working on farming octopuses commercially. Mass production. The science community's response to these settlements and to the broader evidence of octopus intelligence has been part of a growing pushback against that idea. An animal that builds neighborhoods, signals emotions, remembers rivals, and plans ahead is not an animal that belongs in a factory. Beyond the ethics, the discovery raises a deeper scientific question. If these octopuses, with their one-year lifespans, their solitary instincts, their chemically programmed deaths, can develop something resembling social behavior under the right conditions, what does that say about the conditions under which intelligence and sociality emerge? The old model was simple. Intelligence evolved because social living requires it. You need a big brain to navigate complex social relationships. Primates got smart because living in groups demanded it. Dolphins got smart for the same reason. Social life is the engine of cognition. But octopuses break that model. They built the social life without the brain that was supposed to explain it. Or maybe they're building both simultaneously, right now in real time in Jervis Bay, in a shell bed 2 meters wide. The sites are still there. Matt Lawrence, the diver who found Octopolis in 2009, still dives it periodically, checking in on whoever's home. Numbers go up, numbers go down. Sometimes a shark moves in and everyone clears out. Then the shark leaves, and slowly the dens fill again. Peter Godfrey Smith, who has now spent over a decade watching these sites, wrote recently that other sites are probably out there, undiscovered, sitting on the sea floor, full of gloomy octopuses doing things they're not supposed to be doing. What we found in Jervis Bay wasn't just two clusters of octopuses living close together. It was evidence that the rules we wrote for the natural world have more exceptions than we thought, that intelligence takes shapes we haven't recognized yet, that even the loneliest creature on the sea floor, given the right location and the right food supply, might, just might, reach out a tentacle toward its neighbor. Not for friendship, probably to steal their den, but still, that's something.